I slipped into the water bottle of a stranger, a man I met on a balcony lit by coastal neon, and pretended I didn't know his girlfriend existed. Not until after sunrise, not until the flight home, not until my phone buzzed with a tag that broke me. People think I stumbled into it, that I'm just another fool who couldn't resist the ocean and the whiskey and the chance to be seen. But I knowingly violated a boundary that matters most. I kept my eyes open, traced his ring finger while the tide kept its own promise. And then I climbed stairs like a coward when I discovered he updates a photo every weekend. I'm not confused about why I said nothing in that moment, and I'm not asking for sympathy when I say I didn't know how much hell this choice would bake into the months ahead. I made this mess, and I turned small lies into heavy scaffolding, and I will tell you everything, including the one detail that destroys the man I wanted to be before I ever slept with him. I already knew, because my stepdad brought his name home on a work call that sounded like gossip. I was exhausted by January, pulled thin by a job that paid in anxiety, my sleep cycles stuck in a mid-40s grind. A conference in Lisbon was my escape, a balcony above Tagus water, a bottle of wine and a kind laugh from someone who seemed dangerously familiar, like a taste I'd been missing for years. We talked until the night stopped bothering us with clocks, and when he slipped the room card into my hand and said, 3 floors down, I can be wrong, I thought I deserve this. I thought I can be the kind of person who steps out of her life and finds someone who wants her without question. I thought if this is a sin, let it be sweet. Then I thought again when his wallet slid, because the photo was tucked against his ID, and he blushed hard, said, I wish I'd told you sooner, said, I thought we were a mistake we'd fix later, and I pushed the only honest bit inside me to the side. That moment was small, but I watched myself make a small, exact choice. I said we're not a mistake. I said I can wait. I kept texting him after the plane, and after landing I didn't untag myself from the photo. I told myself I was honoring the possibility that things could change. I told myself his ring finger didn't belong to me, but my silence didn't need to belong to his story. I told myself I could be patient like a saint, then laughed at my own nonsense. My friend Hannah said, he seems nice, and I beamed as if I had just won a prize. The sting came on Wednesday, when the tag arrived. The wedding ring on his finger in an ocean-tinted photo was paired with the caption he never let his hand show, a caption about happily ever after with someone called Mara. The name rang like thunder in my apartment, and I Googled out of a small shame that spread into panic. Mara, a documentary filmmaker, an owner of 2 rescue dogs, a teacher in art school, a name with a gentle backstory that didn't include one-night stands on balconies. That same night, as I tried to stop the guilt from stirring, he answered the text with a blurred honesty. I'm sorry. It's complicated. I'm not ready to tell her. I could feel my stomach drop. I wanted to write, you should be honest, but I wrote, tell me when you're ready to be a man, and stared at the screen as if that sentence would clean my mess. I stopped counting tags. I stopped tagging him back. I kept our text thread buried under 100 school assignments for the after-school program where I worked. I hid his messages in airplane mode and hoped the battery would drain before Mara saw anything. I kept saying to myself that I was just being a friend, that we'd shared a horizon, and it could be like a secret therapy session between 2 people who never met. Then at the Friday morning faculty meeting, my supervisor, Mr. Bell, leaned over my desk and murmured, you look like you ran into someone who doesn't deserve your kindness. I flinched. I said, I'm fine. He stared for a beat too long. Then I doubled down, telling myself I hadn't actually slept with a married man because marriage was whatever ring finger had, and rings can mean a tradition that a person is heir to but doesn't wish to keep. On Sunday morning, my neighbor Anna, whose daughter attended my art club, tagged me in a post and wrote, your summer looks amazing. I stared at the balcony photo and saw my bare shoulders with a man's shadow turned into a strange memory that fit into my life like a lock without a key. I clicked hide this post and told Anna in a text that was not my finest hour. Then I sent a smiling emoji to the man who was married, because my sense of comedy had turned inside out and wouldn't stop echoing. At work Monday, during after-school sculpture, Noah knocked his clay onto the floor and refused to pick it up. I asked him what had happened, and he muttered something about his mother, and it snapped me out of my fog. I knelt and looked at the clay and said, if you don't pick up your mistake, you won't make anything beautiful. He rolled his eyes and said, why does it matter if it breaks? I swallowed my panic like medicine and said, because choosing to repair is an art. I thought this kid will never know I'm the person who sits in her apartment and lies to every person she sees, but I also thought maybe I can show him something without telling him anything. The next day, at the checkout aisle in the grocery store, where I bought bottles of gum to drown a fear that wouldn't calm, I saw Mara's film still playing on the loop near the exit, saw her name printed bright on an event flyer at the cafe. I saw a man who looked like the ring on the wedding photo. He wasn't at the checkout, but I thought I felt him near. I stepped into an aisle that smelled like citrus and palm and repeated to myself, I can be a person who walks away from a stranger who thinks he deserves me. It was a good line, but my fingers checked the phone. He sent me a voice note saying, my uncle is your stepfather, and I thought the entire room dropped into a black pool. Then, right then, a truth bomb landed on me hard, because my stepdad's name had never been his uncle, the man who kept photos on his desk with Mara, had never mentioned his own last name aloud in our house, and my stepdad's boss had spoken about a guy called Luca, who wasn't his boss. The whole map switched, like the coastline around Lisbon had been a cheap brochure, and now I was staring at a detailed atlas that showed me exactly where the storm was. I sat on the bench outside and put my hand to my forehead. Then another thought chimed. Maybe it wasn't true. Maybe this was a tool he'd grabbed to make me share something with him. But the damage was already a smudge across my face, and I put it on anyway. When I opened the house door to my stepdad that night, I was different. I didn't hug him. I said, hey, and he said, you look like you did when you took the job. I felt the world narrowing around a lie I could feel in my teeth, a lie that tasted like the ocean. I wrote him a long text about how adult relationships don't need family approval, and he wrote back, honey, that's true, and I felt my choices escalate like water that will find any crack. On Wednesday, my sister and I went to the farmer's market and bought yellow peaches, and I put the bag in my apartment like a symbol of my attempt at normality. The man sent another text, this time saying, I love the peach photo. I asked him if he understood how offensive it was to tell me that when he had a girlfriend named Mara whose pet dogs are named Sumo and Sunset, and I sent the emoji with the flag out of nowhere. He wrote back, Mara and I are in a transition. My fingers trembled. I wrote back, don't turn your transition into my drama, and I thought I had figured out a way to keep my mouth shut without keeping my heart closed. That night, I went to bed and dreamed I was back on that balcony, and the ring finger was on my palm, and I was speaking Spanish and the ocean was cutting off the right side of the world and pulling the left into a new type of hunger. I woke up and realized I had been asleep for 10 minutes. My heart said, this is getting worse. My phone said, new tag. I pulled it. Mara had posted her own balcony photo and the caption said, happily anchored. I stared at that word and felt anchored to something that hurt. He replied, anchor forever. That sentence said a lot more than a man who tries to keep secrets can afford to say. It said I'm saying words to the woman who loves me while you and I keep doing what we're doing, and if Mara ever finds out, she will ask me how I loved her. I knew. I had known longer than I ever said, because my stepdad's family brought home names on quiet Sunday afternoons, and my stepdad's friend called me by the wrong name on a video call, and the ring finger was just a symbol of a wedding that had names I had seen before. The moment I brushed that thought away, I felt myself crumble again. I thought, you're such a clown. Then I got on the phone with Luca again, and he told me about the company where I had learned to handle books and numbers, and how he was a person who tells stories for money. He said, you sound familiar. I said, people sound familiar, and he laughed too politely, and the laughter rang like the first day in a place where nothing belongs to you. I placed my next call to Hannah and told her nothing. I told her my mother's tomato sauce had burned that afternoon, and I said, I don't want to do the thing where I talk to her and I end up feeling like a child. Hannah said, you've grown. I said, I think I've grown a mouth. Hannah sent me a photo of a smiling face I'd never seen. I said, who is that? She said, it's a barista. He's very kind. I wanted to be a barista, a person who gives warmth and takes a name with a smile. The man sent me the good night text, and I typed back, good night, and watched the second hand tick like a small war. Saturday afternoon, Anna tagged me in a comment thread about the balcony photo, and someone wrote, who's the cute man? I said, he's not my man, and Anna wrote back, you were good on that trip. I hid the post. I turned my camera to my kitchen counter and filmed the peaches and the lemon I'd sliced, and the way the orange light fell across the top like a memory, and I posted it to my story without his name. It felt like a sentence that didn't need anyone else's confirmation. Then his message pinged again. He said, "Mara says you should try tea. She means you should rest." I realized what had happened and wanted to scream, then laugh, then go to my stepdad and ask him if he was a villain or a friend. I wrote back, "Tell her the peaches are good," and took out a kitchen knife and sliced my thumb. Blood spelled the name I had to avoid and stayed in a little ring at the tip of my finger like a red bead. The next morning I called Luca. I asked him if his last name matched my stepdad's, and he said yes, then asked, "Why?" I said, "You used to be a man who keeps secrets like a craft." He laughed and said, "I had a boss who taught me that any secret I tell makes life easier for me." I laughed too, and I felt ashamed that I had used Luca's company as a reason to be angry about an event I had brought into my life. I told him I had a crush on someone, and he asked if it was someone he knew. I said no. He told me a story about a woman named Layla who liked him in high school and whose kindness saved him from making bad decisions in college. He said, "People keep secrets like they keep bandages. They wrap them too tightly." That sentence hit me in the stomach. I said, "Is this a story about me?" He said, "It's a story about anyone." I thought that's true. I thought I could be anyone. I thought if I were anyone, I would not have touched that ring finger. Monday brought a social world. Mr. Bell called me into the faculty room and said, "We're doing an after-school presentation on art and truth. I want you to moderate." I said, "What if I tell the truth about art?" He said, "Art tells truths about people. People tell truths about themselves." I felt my stomach drop again. I thought I have to do this. I thought I'll break something. At lunch, Anna asked if I would help with the family video project for her daughter, and I said yes. I carried my bag to her house and saw the photos of her and her husband and her parents and their little dog that looked like a mixture of all three. She said, "You should have a dog. I think your energy would be good for a pet." I said, "I'm more like a hurricane than a pet." She laughed. I told her we should invite the neighborhood kids, and she said, "That's a good idea." I thought that's a good idea. Then Anna asked, "Who is that man in your balcony photo?" I said, "No one." She said, "You posted it with a man." I looked at her blank and thought, this is an odd interview. I said, "He's a friend." She said it looked like romance. I said it was alcohol. She looked like she believed me. I felt like I had broken a glass on purpose and kept drinking anyway. I called my mother for the first time in weeks. She said, "You sound cold." I said, "I have a cold." She said, "Take care." Then she said, "Your stepdad asked about you." I said, "What did he say?" She said, "He said you seemed tired." I said, "That's an interesting assessment." She said, "He's proud of you." I hung up and texted him a funny meme about a plant that grew too fast, and he sent back a dog biting into a pretzel. That was a minute of joy I didn't deserve, and I kept it. The next day, Noah didn't come to sculpture. He was suspended for hitting a kid who called him a fake superhero. I asked Mr. Bell why, and he said, "Kids hear words they don't know yet." I said, "They hit with words." He said, "Sometimes they don't know where to put the feelings." I felt my throat close. I went home and opened my laptop. I wanted to write a poem that didn't lie. I wrote I stood on a balcony once and thought the city would carry me home without anyone noticing. Then I erased the second sentence because it felt like a punchline. I wrote, I met a man and tried to be the kind of person I thought I was, and then I erased that too, and the blank document felt like a mirror and I wanted to break it. He texted me, "You don't need to answer if you don't want to." I answered, "I do want to." He said, "I'm sending you a playlist." I told him I'm busy. He said, "You deserve quiet," and I closed the laptop. The next night I watched Mara's film. It was about people who plan their weddings under the weight of climate change, how they make vows that stand against water levels that rise. The camera cut to her hands holding a vase, and the vases shook like my nerves, and I thought, this is a woman who believes in vows and lives inside them. I thought I've destroyed nothing, that I've seen, have only constructed something that could collapse easily. I thought maybe that collapse would be a relief. The next morning, Noah returned to class and put his clay back on the wheel and began to make a bowl. He said, "It's ugly." I said, "It's a bowl." He said, "Bowls are meant to hold." I said, "They can hold anything if you trust them." He looked at me with a face that felt like a person who had just seen the ocean for the first time. He said, "Okay." He was right. It was a bowl. The next twist, the worst one I was hiding, opened like a door that had been locked behind another door. He wrote me one night and said, "I've been thinking about your stepdad." I said, "Why?" He said, "We met at an event where your stepdad was talking about families that grow into other families," and I laughed because I remembered that exact talk and how my stepdad had said, "Sometimes we live under the wrong branch." He said, your stepdad said your name. He said you'd be at Lisbon. He said, she'll try to do too much again. I stared. Then he sent me a message I was an uncle at his company before I left. I thought no, he said, I am not an uncle. I am a man who saw you before I knew who you were. My phone ran hot against my ear. He said, I've been keeping something from you. The ring finger, the photo, the name, my connection to you. I said, stop. He said, my connection to your stepdad is complicated. My chest tightened like a jar with a broken lid. He said, we met at your house when I was 19. I said, we never met. He said, you don't remember because you were 18 and you made a playlist. I remembered playlists, little 90s guitar loops I used to sing to when I was alone. I said, that's impossible. He said, it happened. Then my brain did that thing where it scrolled back and found all the small shards and placed them like a puzzle. The ring finger I hadn't looked at because I had told myself I didn't need to. The photo I saw on the loop with his name attached to a group we both knew, but one of us refused to admit. The night I left my stepdad's house, when the doorbell rang and I pretended it was the pizza man and never looked at the person who left. He said, I walked to the kitchen and saw your playlist on the screen, a list of songs that felt like you'd be at my door if I ever called. He sent me an emoji of a door opening and a hand on a doorknob. He said, I don't know why I'm telling you this now. He said, I think I want to say the worst thing first. He said, I am not dadding Mara for real. He said, she is my wife. The truth was bad enough, but the worst part came right after. He said, you remember your stepdad's speech about growth and change? I said, yes. He said, he talked about sons and daughters who become friends and then strangers. I said, he didn't. He said names of people who could be our family, and I was one of them. My head went quiet. He said, before Mara, before Lisbon, before you and I spoke at all, I was engaged to your stepdad's cousin. I said, that's not my stepdad. He said it was a cousin, a woman named B. He said she broke it off when she saw me with a girl I thought was a stranger at a concert. He said, that girl was you. He said, you sang a song and left. He said, I stood behind you and never caught your name. He said, you didn't turn around. He said, I told Mara about you when she saw me writing your playlist on a napkin and she asked if I was a man with a ghost. He said, she laughed and said she wasn't jealous of ghosts. He said, we married anyway. He said, we told everyone we were a good match. He said, you didn't exist in our lives until Lisbon and then you did. I felt like someone had opened my chest and put a hand in and pressed the part that keeps me alive. He said, now you know. I said, why? He said, because we did this. He said, because if you think of me as a stranger who touches you, you should also think of me as a man who feels like you know him. He said, you will think I am lying now and you'll say I changed everything to make this worse. He said, I did change everything to make this worse. I said, I don't know how to say what I feel. He said, say nothing. I said, I'm afraid. He said, tell Mara. I said, no. He said, tell your stepdad. I said, no. He said, tell the people who love you. I said, they love me too. He said, some do. He wrote me one more thing, I'm sending you the playlist you made. It's not Lisbon. It's the one you made before that. If you listen, I will say sorry. I put my thumb into the wound because that was the only thing that felt real. The next days carved marks into everything. Noah made 3 bowls and broke one on purpose and laughed and cried. Anna dropped her camera during the neighborhood video night and said, I'll cut it, and the children took her phone and filmed each other screaming at the camera. Mr. Bell stood at the back of the room while children laughed and said, art is a chance to tell truth, and I stood near him and didn't speak. My sister sent me a photo of a wedding cake she'd baked and wrote, I'm moving closer to the kitchen, and I sent back, move to the kitchen, then buy a house in the kitchen. She laughed with the kind of laugh I had invented before, and for a minute the world felt friendly again. The worst thing I had done in this mess happened 3 days after I learned his connection to my stepdad. I did the one act I cannot fix. I looked for Mara's Instagram and I told her, your husband flirted with me on vacation. She responded immediately. She wrote, I need to know if you're lying. I wrote, I am not lying. She wrote, why would you do that? I wrote, because I was lonely. She wrote, we have dogs. I wrote, I know. She wrote, do you have proof? I sent her the balcony photo and then I sent her the tag he had never approved of, the one I had hidden on my phone. She wrote back, this is cruel. I wrote, yes. She wrote, I will talk to him. She wrote, I will call you. I said, okay, and put my phone down. I walked around my apartment and touched the kettle and then I touched my throat and then I touched my foot and then I picked up the phone again and sent him a message I told her. He responded fast. He said, why? I said, because she deserves the truth. He said, you told her. I said, yes. He said, I told her we were talking. I said, you said we were talking. He said, I said we were not an affair. I said, you did. He said, I will say I love her. I said, say what you want. He said, you should tell your stepdad. I said, no. He said, this is not just about you. I said, I know. He said, you hurt someone who doesn't deserve it. I said, I know. He said, I am calling your stepdad. I said, don't. He called him. The phone rang at my stepdad's house in a tone that made me jump like a cat. He said, you made a mistake. I said, I did. He said, I met him years ago. I said, I know. He said, you made a choice. I said, I did. He said, you turned my world into a house where someone stays in the guest room forever. I said, I'm sorry. He said, Luca is my cousin, and I felt my chest do that thing again. He said, Luca's last name is yours. He said, it is my mother's maiden name. He said, we told families, then untold them, and he laughed like someone who had seen movies too many times. He said, you have his ring finger tattooed with shame. I said, no. He said, you have it on your mouth. I said, stop. He said, you will come home. I said, yes. He said, you will bring peaches. I said, I will bring peaches. He said, you will tell me how you broke this. I said, I will tell you. He said, say the first word. I said, balcony. He said, say the second. I said, ring. He said, say the third. I said, Mara. He said, say the fourth. I said, Luca. He said, say the last. I said, me. We sat in the kitchen, his hands quiet, my hands quiet, and his wife put her palm on the table and said, honey, I love you. He said, we love you. My sister put 2 peaches on the table and said, make it count. I thought, I will make it count. He said, do you want to call Luca? I said, no. He said, you can call him. I said, no. He said, tell me what you felt. I said, I felt like I could fix a life I didn't know. He said, you did that with your own life. He said, you broke something in a way that doesn't fit in a frame. He said, you will spend years fixing frames. He said, we will help you. I said, I know. He said, if you call Luca, call him and say, I don't want your explanations. He said, say, I want my stepdad to tell me what I should do. He said, say, I want to tell Mara the truth myself. He said, you have the right to tell the truth yourself. The vent that broke me down didn't come as a phone call or a tag. It came as a moment when I was sitting in a circle with Anna and her family while Anna's daughter sang badly into a phone and Anna's husband held a flower like it could make everything okay. The phone rang. The other ring finger was on the screen. It said Luca. I took a breath that tasted like lime and vinegar and stood up. I walked to the kitchen and answered. He said, you made my life become a museum. He said, everyone looks at it. He said, my mother is afraid. He said, your mother is afraid. He said, your stepdad and I decided we will not call you again for a year. He said, this is a punishment. He said, it is also a cure. He said, we will speak again when we are ready to be strangers. He said, you can remain the kind of person who is kind without ghosts. He said, you will be the kind of person who doesn't need a man to say good night. He said, I will not say good night. I said, okay. I hung up. I went back into the living room and Anna's daughter said, you look like you just got out of a storm, and I said, I did. She said, should I turn up the volume? I said, turn up the truth. The nights after were a series of rooms where nothing fit. I spoke to Hannah and said, I told him to stop. Hannah said, you did the right thing. I said, it hurts. She said, the right thing always hurts. I said, I hate that. She said, you will hate it and learn it. I took 2 peach halves and stared at them and put them on a plate and said, I will eat them slow. I took a spoon and ate the first bite like I was apologizing to the fruit and the person who grew it. I told my sister a story about my shoes that were uncomfortable and how I didn't throw them away. I said, they have holes I can't fill. She said, some holes don't fill some holes we wear like a pattern. I said, I hate that. She said, you will hate it and learn it. The bed felt like a raft sometimes, and I thought I will float away if I am not careful. I woke up and made tea and sat on the kitchen floor and read the letters of the alphabet slowly to myself, and thought A is for Anna, B is for balcony, C is for confession, D is for day when I tell the truth, E is for end, F is for father, G is for guilt, H is for honey, I is for I, J is for joke, K is for kindness, L is for lying, M is for Mara, N is for Noah, O is for ocean, P is for peaches, Q is for quiet, R is for ring, S is for shame, T is for truth, U is for uncertainty, V is for vow, W is for worst, X is for xylophone, Y is for yes, Z is for 0. I counted to 0 again and again until my thumb stopped bleeding. On the last day before the punishment year began, Mara wrote me. She said, I will not cancel the gallery event. She said, the film will show. She said, you may come if you want to see the part where the vows break. She said, or you can stay home and tell the story to yourself. I said, I will come. She said, you may bring peaches. I said, I will bring peaches. I went. I walked into the dark room where people talked in whispers, and I sat next to Anna, who had brought her dog, and the dog slept, and I felt a kind of warmth that was not a lie. The screen showed the water rising, and the couples planning, and the anchors pulled into rings, and then the film cut to a hand holding a ring and the words, "In every vow we trust that nothing is forever, in every ring we hold the forever we can make." I cried. I hated crying, but I cried because it felt like someone was putting my chest back together with needles that hurt and a healing that would last. After the film, Mara stood near the exit and touched her hair and looked at me. She said, "I will not forgive you." I said, "I will not ask for forgiveness." She said, "I will not cancel my life." I said, "I will not cancel mine." She said, "We are strangers who are honest." I said, "I can live with that." She said, "You will, because you have already started." She walked away. The gallery lights dimmed, and I saw Noah's bowls shining under them like moons. Mr. Bell came up behind me and said, "You did the right thing." I said, "I did." He said, "The right thing is ugly and beautiful." I said, "I know." He said, "You didn't ruin anyone." I said, "I ruined me." He said, "You can rebuild the way people rebuild when a storm breaks the city and the city refuses to stay broken." He said, "You are standing on a balcony that is not the balcony you fell from." He said, "That matters." I returned to my apartment and sat with the peaches again. I cut them into halves. I tasted them like a person who had made a vow to herself to tell the truth. The man on the phone had said the worst thing first, then another worst thing after, and another worse thing after that. I had told Mara the truth. I had asked my stepdad for help. I had begun to do the thing that many people call repair. I don't know if repair ever truly works, but I think it tries to make the shape of things into a bowl again. I think it makes a home out of a story that had no windows. I will be judged, and I will judge myself, and I will let the room where I told secrets open to the person who matters most me. I will tell the next person I love that I am afraid of rings, and I will explain why. I will tell them that balconies are good for looking, not for jumping. I will not be perfect. I will be the person who tries to keep her hand on the bowl, and not on the ring finger, and not on the throat of anyone else's truth. I am telling this now because a friend asked me if I ever went back to Lisbon, and I lied and said, I forgot. I told myself I was protecting him and my stepdad and my family and my job and the children who trust me with Clay. I said, I forgot, because it felt easier than saying, I messed up. But I'm telling it now because I want to be the person who can stand on any balcony and say, I broke a vow, and then build a place for repair where people can come and sit on the floor and make bowls and speak their names without hiding. I am saying it now because the worst truth was that he wasn't a stranger. He was connected to me through my stepdad's family. And he was engaged to someone named B before he married Mara. And we had met at a concert where I sang badly. And he never knew my name. And then we met on a balcony where he made me feel like I could change things. And then I felt like I had ruined a marriage and a family, and a place where people learn to throw clay and break it and fix it again. I am saying it now because people say, love is love, and I want to say, vows are vows and rings mean something, and the sea is real and will try to flood the kitchen, and I want to say, I can be a person who learns to hold the bowl without putting my hand in the glaze. This is my story, and it does not end with a neat moral, because I do not have the right to end things with a neat moral. I broke something and then I paid the cost, and then I tried to make a new shape that people can use. You may think I am a fool, you may think I am brave, you may think I am cruel, you may think I am kind. You may think the one-night stand was my only mistake, but I think the bigger mistake was the way I let him and the ring finger turn my heart into a ring. And I think the biggest mistake was the day I decided that silence would fix what only honesty could fix. I have paid with solitude, and with questions from a child who told me the truth is an art, and with conversations in a kitchen where peaches made me taste regret. I will tell the truth again when I can, to myself first, and to others next, because the only way I know how to live with the sound of the water rising is to tell the story of the night I went on a balcony and thought the city would carry me home. The city did not carry me, I did, clumsily, with a bowl in my hand and a peach on my tongue, and the worst truth inside my chest like